Welcome to the Mets Pod. On today's show, we preview what's going to be the craziest stretch run of the year for the New York Mets as they take on not only the Marlins, but a wild, hyped-up series down in Atlanta with the division on the line. We also touch on Polar Bear Pete's record-breaking season and what lies ahead for him, potentially a new contract extension. And the man batting in front of him, Lindor and Alonso, have combined for an incredible year in the 3 and 4 spots. Later on, we talk about the not-so-great situation of Darin still struggling and how the Mets can handle that heading into the postseason. And as always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, and the final sprint is here. The final turn of the corner. Joe, it looks like it's not going to be smooth sailing, not going to be easy. There was a point where the Mets were 2.5 games up. As you and I sit here, the Mets have a 1.5 lead in the division. It is all going to come down to the series in Atlanta. But it's been a fun little run here for the Mets, and especially the Mets offense, the damage that they were able to do in Oakland. How you doing? How you feeling? Let's bring you on in here.
Feeling good, and we've been saying this for probably 3 weeks now. This division race is going to come down to that series in Atlanta. And it may not technically, I don't know necessarily if there's going to be champagne poured everywhere in Atlanta. There's a chance if the Mets sweep out the Marlins here over the next couple days. And if they could sweep in Atlanta, then boom, they clinched the division in Atlanta. But in a world of somewhat realism, the Mets still control their fate, which is what we talked about last week. If they can take care of Miami, take 2 out of 3 in Atlanta, take 2 out of 3 in Washington, the division is on wraps. So it's in front of them. They could do what they want with it. And like you said, the bats came alive in Oakland. And, we're going to talk about a couple of the key pieces as to why that happened.
Yeah, you never want to get too out in front. The Mets still need to take care of business in these 2 home games at Citi Field against the Marlins, both on Tuesday evening and Wednesday evening. But the way it's set up right now, the Mets will have in this order down in Atlanta, Chris Bassitt, followed by Jacob deGrom, coming off his roughest start we've seen in a very, very long time, and Max Scherzer, who absolutely took care of business against the A's. Bassitt will be matched up against Max Fried. Jacob deGrom will be matched up against Kyle Wright, and Max Scherzer will be matched up against Charlie Morton. So when you look at it like that, obviously that is a positive outlook for the Mets. Now, they still need to show up. They still need to get it done. The lineup needs to hit. They're on the road. They're playing in a place that is never easy for the New York Mets or for anybody, and everybody knows the implications on the line. So, Joe, looking at this series, I don't want to throw at you. How do you expect things to shake out? Because these can be so unpredictable. But what are a couple of things that you think are really, really important for the Mets in this series, besides their big 3 headlining the starting pitching matchups?
Well, number one is the weather. As
the
hurricane's coming up the coast, and there's word that it could have an impact on the weekend series. I'm not a meteorologist. I won't even play one here on a podcast. But in a world that series gets wiped out by weather in Atlanta, they're going to have to move the series to a neutral site or something because
they have to play it, right?
Yeah, they have to play it, 1, and 2, there's no room between game 162 and the wild card. The regular season ends on October 5th, and the wild card starts on October 7th. So there's no way to move it around, so they would have to physically go somewhere else. Hopefully that's not the case, but that's number 1 on my list, actually, is are they actually playing in Atlanta? Or are they playing in Texas or Philadelphia or some other location of a team that's on the road? But there's no doubt to me that it has to be the offense stepping up. I think we know how Atlanta can be on the offensive side of the ball. They can hit home runs in bunches. They could go on streaks where they don't touch the ball. If the Mets are able to score, maybe not necessarily quite like they did in Oakland, that's obviously you're facing Max Fried and Charlie Morton and Kyle Wright, 3 fantastic pitchers. But the offense needs to take that step up and make life a little easier for Bassitt, deGrom, Scherzer. As good as they are, they're facing a potent lineup of another close to or will end up 100-win team. So it's important that the offense gives them the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to be in 1-1 games in the 8th inning. I want a little breathing room. So the offense that played really well in Oakland needs to continue on over this week.
Yeah, the Braves hit an interesting patch where they dropped 3 games in a row. The first one of the Nationals, 2 in Philly, and they only scored 3 runs across those 3 games. Now, in their last 2 wins in Philadelphia, they were able to score 14 runs combined. They had a comeback win after the long delay against the Phillies, where the Phillies could have taken or should have taken 3 out of 4. So the Braves' offense has hit a little bit of a roller coaster. It's back up on a bit of a peak here, and we'll see what version we get of that after they play the Nationals. Every time I look at it, I feel like the Braves play the Nationals. I swear. I feel like the Braves are just always playing the Nationals. So they got 3 more with the Nationals, then they get the Mets. It's going to be very interesting to see how their feast or famine offense does against, obviously, the Mets' 3 best starters. They're throwing them right out there. But I'm with you. Things to monitor right now, and this one might be more towards the postseason. Starling Marte is continuing what he can tolerate in terms of baseball activities. There is signs of healing in the hand, in the finger, but that is something that the Mets understandably cannot rush, or else you can't have an ineffective Marte out there. You need him to be 100% right. You need him to be ready to go. And this kind of transitions us perfectly, Joe. We could sit here, you and I, and we do this most weeks. We could sit here and we could talk about Darin Ruf being an issue, or hot and cold streaks of Escobar, the catchers, Guillorme, whoever we want, Canna, who's had moment after moment. The Mets will go as far as their 3 and 4 hitters take them, for the most part. And that is Francisco Lindor, who quietly, sure, he's not an MVP frontrunner by any stretch of the means, but quietly should finish in the top couple spots of the MVP voting. That's how, if you're just looking at WAR right now for Francisco Lindor, that metric. And then Pete Alonso, who just had the most RBIs in a single season for the New York Mets. We were laughing about this when we were texting Joe. It's almost because, and I'm guilty of this, as Mets fans, you get so stuck in the vacuum of just watching the Mets and watching slumps and tough spurts. It's hard to put a 3 and 4 hitter consistently against what these two do. I'm sure there's plenty of teams that can at least argue it, but Lindor and Alonso have lived up to every bit of the hype and dream that the front office, that the coaching staff, and the fans could have asked for.
Like you said, Alonso setting the Mets RBI record. He's going to hit 40-plus home runs. Lindor's over 100 RBIs, and he's going to finish within the top 5 amongst position players in all of baseball in WAR. So, I mean, this is a premium year from their 3-4 hitters. And one thing we always will say, and you hear about this in other sports too, in the big moments, that's where your stars need to step up. And the big moments have been, frankly, the last 2 weeks of Mets baseball, where every game is mattering, because the Braves haven't, sustained much of a losing streak. Like you said, they lost 3 in a row at one point, but generally speaking, they don't lose more than 1 or 2 in a row. So you have to continually keep pace. And over the last 2 weeks, Francisco Lindor has a 955 OPS. Pete Alonso has an OPS over 1.126 with 6 home runs in 2 weeks. Like, this is the definition of your star middle-of-the-order players stepping up when you need them to. And I expect them to continue that this week, and then, hopefully going into a deep October run. But there's no question that, you're looking at Goldschmidt and Arenado. Like, those are 2 of the best players by WAR in baseball. Yep. So that's probably your best group. But I agree with you in regards to Lindor's MVP status. He's probably not going to win the MVP award, but when they announce the MVP, Goldschmidt, Freddie Freeman, whoever they give it to, when they show all the votes, you're going to see Lindor's name on that leaderboard somewhere.
Yeah, and he's earned it. And we'll get back to Lindor in a second, but I do want to stick with Alonso, who now has 128 RBIs. He's going to eclipse the one. So he's not even just breaking the record. It's looking like Alonso could shatter it with a strong week to the season. He can absolutely set that mark beyond anywhere it's ever gone. You said it, Joe. He's going to eclipse 40 home runs. The OPS at 869. It wouldn't shock me if that goes up a couple, ticks here. He's getting on base at a 350 clip. It's been a massive year for Pete. Now, the conversation, I think, goes from, and it was interesting to me to hear Max Scherzer talk about Pete Alonso. Max isn't someone that's just going to throw around heaping praise on young players all the time. It's obvious Pete is a well-respected player there. He is a homegrown player for the New York Mets. And in this era, that isn't very common anymore. A lot of the stars for the Mets are guys that were traded for, signed in free agency. There's nothing wrong with that. But Pete is a former second-round pick by this regime, by the scouting staff specifically, and someone that, while yes, he's not set to hit free agency till 2025, that arbitration number is going to go up significantly each year. Joe, at what point, and I know it's not at the top of the list because the Mets have so many pending free agents, guys that can walk as soon as free agency starts, Diaz, Bassett, on and on and on. But at what point does making Alonso a Met for the prime and beyond of his career have to come into play, not just for optics, but for winning baseball games and him being such a part of a new tone in this Mets era?
I think Pete Alonso really emerged as a full hitter this year. Like, he's not just a masher now. He works counts, he takes his walks. You're seeing him hit singles and doubles, and he's coming up in clutch situations and coming through with what he needs to. If he needs to hit a fly ball, he's been able to do that. I think he certainly warrants a long-term extension. You see what the Braves are doing, where they're just paying everyone, and somehow most of them are below market. But regardless, they're paying all their homegrown players, and I'd like to see the Mets start that trend here, and I think Pete Alonso's a prime candidate for it. Like you said, there's a lot to do this offseason. Jacob deGrom decision, Chris Bassett, Edwin Diaz, Brandon Nimmo, basically the rest of the bullpen. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made that I think supersede a Pete Alonso extension. But the prime time to work out extensions in baseball, and I think it's probably pretty similar in football, basically right in spring training, right around spring training. So when the off-season work is done, you've accomplished everything you need to do with re-signing your own guys, signing and trading for new guys. All right, now they're getting to St. Lucie. That gives you like a solid month. And you see a lot of players set deadlines, typically around like opening day or maybe mid-late March, where they just want to stop having contract talks. But if I were the Mets, Alonso would be a priority when I got to St. Lucie to try to figure out a long-term deal if that's something he's interested in, which, I mean, knowing the way Pete is, it would surprise me if he was someone that was like, nah, I want to see through to free agency. He's a guy that would end up being a free agent on the older side of the spectrum, so that's certainly a factor when you're talking about signing long-term.
It's a really good point. Pete will turn 28 in December, which would essentially mean that he's a guy that would be a free agent at that 30-year-old mark, and he's repped by Apex Baseball. So it's a lot of that is in Pete's hands. If he's somebody who he's really embraced the New York spotlight, which a lot of guys have come through here, and they've either struggled with it or they've wanted to, in a large part, stay out of that spotlight. I think Pete's charity work heavily with the New York first responder groups and everything like that, and a guy that has not really crumbled under pressure by any stretch of the means, especially with the kind of rookie season he's had. And speaking of that, somebody who's busted each and every one of those narratives of pressure, back to Lindor. Just to put it in perspective here, Joe, last year, his first season with the Mets, a 734 OPS. He hit 20 home runs. He had 63 RBIs. This year, he's already got 25 home runs. He's got 40 more RBIs. I think the clutch factor with Lindor, driving runners in, has just been insane difference and upgrade. He batted 230 last year. He's batting 275 right now. I bet you a lot of people don't realize Lindor's batting average is up to 275. The amount of hits he's had in the month of September, getting on base at that 346 clip. The slugging is drastically up from 412 to 456. This is who the Mets were paying $30 million plus a year. Not just the numbers, because they're really, really good. Not just the defense, because they're really, really good. The leadership and the clutch moments in New York baseball that I think everybody is really excited to watch in October.
When they traded for Lindor and they gave him that big contract, and obviously it was a struggle, and he got a lot of grief from the New York media, the fans, that comes with the territory of signing a $340 million contract in the city of New York. That's the way it is. But you have two options at that point. You could either succumb to that pressure and just kind of fall apart, or you could rise above it and come against it, and that's what Lindor did. And this is, like you said, exactly what the Mets paid for. It's Gold Glove caliber defense, coming up in clutch spots. His batting average is even higher than I think you or I would have guessed. We might have done like an over-under on this in April. Like, we'd have to go back and check. I think our over-under was probably like 260 or something.
I was going to say, I think we had it at 260.
Yeah, so like significantly better than that. The power's there. He's a fantastic leader. You see how he handles the media now, like such a drastic change from last year when he was a part of the thumbs down gate and kind of being a little defensive with the media. You see him maturing and just figuring out the New York market. It helps that things are going really well for him and the team.
But he's a part of that.
But he's a big reason that they're there. And when you think about the value of the contract, it's $34 million a year. If you take his current WAR, and one WAR is valued at around $8 million right now, is kind of the consensus. I don't know who made that up, but that's where we're at. Like his year for 2022 has been worth over $50 million by WAR. So in theory, the Mets
are getting a bargain.
It's an underpaid Francisco Lindor, which who thought you could say that at $34 million. But regardless of that kind of weird mathematical equation that I don't understand, he's been fantastic. He's been everything that they hoped they were getting. And that trade is honestly looking like one of the biggest win-win trades in a long time. I mean, look at what Andres Gimenez and Ahmed Rosario are doing over in Cleveland. Both have been fantastic. Gimenez made the All-Star team, and Lindor is obviously a key contributor to arguably the best team in baseball.
And how could we forget, while the Guardians are getting, two impact players out of that deal, Carlos Carrasco has 15 wins this year and has a sub-4 ERA, 3.79 ERA. I know Carrasco has his problematic starts, but he's had a lot of good ones for the Mets. And Keith always emphasizes this on the broadcast. And also, Carrasco's quietly started almost 30 games this year. That's crazy to me at his age and the injuries he had to deal with last season. I mean, you don't just walk into 15 wins, right? Especially the Mets are a good offensive team. The Mets aren't a great offensive team. So I think that's, the throw-in of the deal has really, really helped. Not right away, but this season, it's been a big, big boost, Joe.
It's been very important, especially when you look at the time missed by Jacob deGrom. Didn't debut until basically the trade deadline. Max Scherzer missed time with the oblique and then mistimed again. So having a guy like Carrasco who just simply took the ball every time, other than I think he missed 2 weeks, a month and a half ago or so. So he missed like a couple weeks. But generally, like you said, he's going to make about 30 starts. He's been out there. He's been relatively consistent. Maybe he's not quite the Carlos Carrasco that was an all-star caliber pitcher in Cleveland, but you can't complain about the year that Carlos Carrasco had. So that was the definition of a win-win trade.
All right, let's throw things to our guests. Joe had the chance to catch up with Jerry Blevins, who you all know well from SNY and John Boy's Shea Station podcast.
For those that did not see or listen to it, over at John Boy, where you do the Shea Station podcast with Jack Olive, Jolly Oliver, the man of many names, you guys had a playoff wins draft where one win in the playoffs equals 1 point. You had the number one overall pick and took the Braves. Explain yourself.
Explain myself. I think it's pretty easy. Where one win equals 1 point, and so you try to accumulate points. I think the Mets are going to win the series, so I think they're going to win the National League East. Therefore, the Braves are going to be a wild card, and they'll have 2 more games to accumulate victories. And so I thought maybe, considering I was drafting against a Brewers fan and a Yankees fan, that I would probably get the New York Mets on the other end. But I didn't. So they chose the Mets first, and I didn't get a chance to pick them again. So I did get a lot of vitriol sent my way, understandably, but it's just a game. Doesn't mean I favor the Braves, but I ended up with the Phillies and the Yankees on my team, so I could see how a quick snapshot that looks pretty crazy.
A little reverse psychology is never a bad thing.
That's
either.
right.
So
and I'm as left-handed and as pitcher as it gets, so I'm all about jinxes, and I do not want to jinx that.
So let's talk about the playoffs and everything coming up with the Mets. So you obviously have had some playoff time in your playing career. No runs allowed in 7 1/3 innings, just so everyone knows. How hard is it as a reliever to control your adrenaline in a postseason environment, especially with a home crowd, when you just come in during the middle of a game?
Difficult. No, see, to me, that was the most fun. That's the best part. When you're a little kid and you're dreaming about being in the big leagues, you're not thinking about a game in June where nothing counts and you're facing the sixth hitter and you're up 8 already. You're thinking about the bottom of the ninth inning and their best hitters up. For me, it was always Ken Griffey Jr., bottom of the ninth, bases loaded, we're only up 1. So whenever that moment, I got to go into those moments, I always told myself, like, this is what I've been practicing for my entire life. This is what all that hard work went into for these moments. Now it's time. It's my time to shine. So I was always capable of slowing it down when it really mattered the most and enjoying it and taking advantage of those situations.
So looking at this Mets team going into the playoffs, there's obviously not many roster decisions I don't think that need to be made, but there's definitely some. Based on everything you're seeing in their starts, as well as their repertoires when it comes to translating to the bullpen in the playoffs, who would you have as your 4th starter behind DeGrom, Max, and Bassett? Would it be Carlos Carrasco or Taijuan Walker?
Gosh, that's I'm 50-50 on it. And I would really use these last 2 starts that they have, especially this 2-game series against Miami. It's kind of a litmus test to see who's the hot hand, because that's who I would go with, because both of them are very capable. I love Cookie Carrasco because of his experience. The guy's pitched in a World Series and pitched effectively. He's got just a ton of playoff experience. And then you have Taijuan Walker, who's been elite at times. He was an all-star last year. He was very capable of being an all-star this year. So if he figures out whatever it is that's been the difference between his 2 splits and he goes on a run, I think they're both capable. So I would use this as, who has the track record against whoever our opponent is and who's hot. So I'm rolling with the hot hand in that situation.
Do you think one or the other has stuff that translates a little better to the bullpen in a short spurt, or do you think it's kind of, 50-50, whichever?
I really don't want either one of them in the bullpen, because you have Trevor Williams, who has been incredible for us all year. He could be that long guy who's done it, who's came in small spurts. And then neither one of them, I don't think, have the electric stuff to be capable of a late inning. Like, I think David Peterson is very capable, and Tylor Megill, I think, can be both weapons. So I really do think it's either that 4th rotation spot or a support role, not on the roster. So unfortunately for those guys, it's like one or the other.
So you mentioned David Peterson, that showing you're a professional. That's a segue to the next question. As our resident lefty reliever, if the Mets are carrying a left-handed reliever on the postseason roster, would you go Joely Rodriguez or David Peterson, and why?
If it's one or the other,
yeah.
I'm going David Peterson. I'm going David Peterson simply because his velocity at times has been elite. I've seen him touch 98 this year, and that slider has been consistent all year, and that's lefties and righties. I like a breaking ball. I guess I'm a traditional old school. A breaking ball is harder to hit. Joely's got that changeup that's effective to both lefties and righties. But I think if David Peterson can harness the mental aspects of being a reliever and really talk to the guys around him and buy into that role, which I think he's on his way to, I think he could be a real weapon in the playoffs as a kind of segue, that the gap between, a 5-inning start to get to that Ottavino in the 8th, that Lugo 7th, 8th, I think he could be that guy, him and Tylor Megill both.
When I watch Peterson, I totally agree with your assessment, by the way. And I thought 98 miles an hour was like wrong, as the radar guns sometimes can be, but it's been more than once. So I think he's able to pump it up in those short spurts. But what I see in Peterson, and while I agree obviously with Peterson over Rodriguez, when he's going right after hitters, he's so much more effective. When you see David Peterson kind of nitpicking and trying to pick off the corners, that's when he's very ineffective. So I think if he could focus and have that go right after the hitter mentality, I totally agree. He could be of big impact in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's the key right there. That's that buying into that attack mode, that killer instinct that you need out of the bullpen, and using your dominant stuff, which I think I've been so impressed with him Him and Trevor Williams, both from the standpoint of handling that bounce back role and swallowing your pride and doing what's best for the team. I really think that if David Peterson talks to the right guy or has a good conversation that sparks something in him, he could be an absolute weapon in that postseason run, or even leading up to the postseason.
So obviously Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso have been fantastic over the last 2-3 weeks, which is, stars stepping up in the big spot. It's the nature of a winning club. But every time there's a playoff series, there's always an X factor player, someone that maybe you're not expecting to perform at such a high level. I think of Daniel Murphy in 2015, who's a guy that obviously was always a good hitter, but he wasn't hit a home run every day hitter. Who's someone on this offense that you think could maybe be the Daniel Murphy of 2022?
Yeah, that's Daniel Murphy's such a special example because he became that guy. Like, he was that guy as a regular. It wasn't just like a Rosarena specialty. Even though a Rosarena is a really good ball player, Daniel Murphy became an MVP caliber candidate every time he stepped on the field. So it's hard to predict. I don't want to say Eduardo Escobar because he's now showing his capabilities of being that guy, the guy that the New York Mets signed to protect Pete Alonso, a switch hitter that could do that. But I think a guy like a Daniel Vogelback could be, a folk hero. He's already a fan favorite, but I think him against righties can step into that role because his approach reminds me of Brandon Nimmo, to where at the plate, he's never going to change what he's trying to do. He's always capable of controlling the strike zone, knowing pitches, knowing where he's at. And he's got the power to be able to produce a pull shot or hit it the other way if it goes the other way. So I look for Daniel Vogelback to add to his folk hero status as a New York Met.
All right, let's step away from the Mets and let's have a little fun here. As we mentioned, Connor is not here doing this interview, so it's just you and I. And I actually heard you met him the other day over at SNY Studios. And, I'm always tagged in videos with Connor with the podcast and everything. And all I ever see is people talking about this guy's hair and how great his hair is. And if there's someone that knows hair, I think Jerry Blevins is someone that does. Is Connor's flow overrated or no?
It's not overrated. It's not overrated. That was the first thing. He's a handsome guy to start with.
Yeah.
And so you see him and you're like, oh, that's a good looking guy. And then you're like, man, that hair is dialed in. I feel like he has to get it cut like every other day, like to keep it that dialed in. He's got his barber right. He's living next door. It might be even his roommate. He's keeping it locked in. He's got a cut right now that's not my particular style. I'm way too old to have that like Euro, semi-mullety look that he's going, but he pulls it off, man. He's got a great head of hair, luscious locks, impressive.
Yeah, he's definitely fortunate, but yeah, I see it all the time and I'm sick of it.
That's fair. Yeah, you got a good head of hair yourself, so
it's not bad.
Don't let him overshadow you in that sense.
I get a bi-weekly haircut, get the fade, keep it tight. So I always love a how did you get there type story. So I also do Mets perspective here at SNY. And every time we have a prospect on, I'm always asking their draft story, their if they got called up to big leagues, how they found out. I'm going to take a not baseball playing perspective, but you grace us with your presence on SNY pre and post pretty often. At what point in your playing career did you think broadcasting could be your future? And how did the whole relationship start with SNY to put you on pre and post game?
It was never really in my head. I knew I could possibly do it, but I didn't know what I wanted to do post playing career. Unfortunately, I wasn't capable of having anything else on my mind besides baseball. Like those guys, like Curtis Granderson, the best human being I've ever met. The ability for him to be so successful on the field and then also be so charitable off the field. Like I wanted to be that, but I couldn't because I had to focus all of my efforts every day on being the best pitcher. I just didn't have the ability to take that time off. So I created relationships with SNY when I came over. It started with Oakland. I did some stuff with Comcast off the field. Sean Doolittle and I would like go around. We got to go to Lucasfilm, LucasArts, and check that out. We went to Twitter headquarters. We did some fun stuff there. And then I started to have like a radio show, a weekly call-in, that kind of thing. So I appreciated the media side point. And then when I got to New York, man, from the jump, knowing that the stadium production crew at the field is top notch, and then learning how good the SNY crews are. I mean, it's like truly the best, like incredibly spectacular at their jobs, as most of New York is, the cream of the crop in every aspect. I just had an appreciation for what they were doing. And so when the pandemic hit, they reached out and asked me to if I had any interest in doing some BNNY stuff. I had some interest, and so we started this kind of open relationship, because I didn't know what I wanted to do after I was done. So right away, I just didn't do anything. And I was like, good, I'll just be a dad, a husband, a brother, a son, whatever the case may be. And then I got those creative needs, I needed to do something. And everything that I was working with SNY became something I love. And like, I feel so blessed to have found something else that I'm passionate about. The same way I was about playing. I really, really love doing broadcasting, the pre and post, the in studio. I got to do it a few times. It's fantastic, and it's fun, and it's challenging, and it's live TV, which is exhilarating, and it keeps me an excuse. I love baseball first and foremost as a fan. So to be able to stay involved, to stay involved in a city that I love, where my oldest son was born, where I, really, this is like a second home for me. I love New York. I love the Mets. I love the Mets fans, and SNY has been an absolute blessing for me in my post-playing career.
For this special occasion, we're going to bring back an old Jerry Blevins segment from the Shea Anything podcast that was previously on this feed. It's time for Rain Delay Recommendation, where Jerry recommends a movie or TV show for our listeners to check out. And before you give it, I'm going to let you know that back in 2017, because I searched on Twitter, I took you for a fan of Summer Catch. I don't know what made me think to tweet that to you in 2017, but I did, when I think you were giving it, I think it was like top 5 favorite baseball movies or something, and I responded, take you for a Summer Catch guy. So do you like Summer Catch? And what would be the rain delay recommendation for right now?
First of all, to me that feels like you're being mean to me right there. That feels like, can I have Connor back? Like, he's at least gonna be nice to me. I don't mind. Like, it's cheesy as hell. Summer Catch is so cheesy. I can't argue with looking at Jessica Biel and all her majesty. There's some really funny parts. Matthew Lillard is hilarious in that movie, but it's not a top. Of course, it's very cheesy. Brian Dennehy as a manager, R.I.P. to Brian Dennehy, but not my favorite. I do love a good baseball movie, though. Yeah. So. You want my recommendation?
Yeah. Oh, right now we're doing the segment.
Yeah, you want to get into it? Let's get into it. So, it's not a baseball movie, not a sports movie, but because we're running into this high octane, we're about to play Atlanta the whole season. The NL East is on the line. We're going into October. It's about to be super intense baseball. I want to get everybody's nerves ready for that. And the new Top Gun Maverick, is exciting. It's exhilarating. It's nervous. It's a lot of built up tension, on the edge of your seat for the entirety of the movie. It's like 2 hours of pure adrenaline dump, which is October baseball. So I highly recommend. Jennifer Connelly is excellent. Miles Teller is incredible in it. And of course, Tom Cruise is amazing. It really is as good as advertised. It's better, in my opinion, than the original. This is a fun story, edge of your seat exhilaration, and that will ready your nerves for the playoffs. So Top Gun Maverick is my rain delay recommendation.
And it's weirdly like still in theaters. I saw it like 3 weeks ago for the second time in theaters. So like, fantastic. Totally agree. That'll get everyone ready. Last one before we let you go, Jerry. Not going to put you on the spot, but kind of am. We may or may not clip this out at some point. Tough to say. What's your prediction? How far do the Mets go in the playoffs?
So again, I have picked the Mets to win the World Series. I think because it's a lot of it is dependent upon pitching, right? You have Max Scherzer, you have Jacob deGrom, and Chris Bassett has been as advertised. He went 8 shutout, and then you have Edwin Diaz at the back end just dominating. So for me, it's going to be hard to be in a series of 5 to 7 games when you have to face those guys. So I think the Mets can win the World Series, and I think they're going to. I think they have everything set up for them. Lindor, McNeil, Pete Alonso, and his the newly franchise leader in RBI single season is approaching 40 home runs. Like, it's all set out on the table. These guys have established it. Buck Showalter, Billy Epler, Stevie Cohen, they've all set this up. And it looks like it's, laying out perfectly for them to take. So I still think that they are really set up to win the World Series. And so, I love the Mets, so it's a little bit of a homerism, but I think they're going to win the World Series. I truly do.
I love it. Mets fans need that vibe. So Jerry Blevins, Shea Station podcast with John Boy Media. Check him out on SNY on pre and post game. And Jerry, we have officially completed the Shea Station Mets Pod combined show. We've had both you and Jack here. Connor and I were there, so really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on, and tell Connor to start working a little bit harder. You can just take segments off. How dare you?
Love it. Appreciate it, Jerry.
Great stuff from Joe and Jerry there. Be sure to check out Jerry on SNY's pre- and post-game shows, as well as John Boy's Shea Station podcast, with, of course, friend of the podcast, Jolly Olive. Jack Oliver, Jolly Olive, the man of many names in the Mets booth. And a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts. You can watch on SNY's YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Joe, I love this note in our glorious rundown. Rough sailing from our producer, Jeff Goldman. And boy, has it been... It's been rough sailing. I mean, I don't want to make this be brutal, the Darin Ruff every single week show, but this is more of, you got to find a solution for this spot at this point. And Joe, you had a tweet as we record today. The Mets have Jesus Luzardo on Wednesday, Max Fried on Friday. The point being, they are lefties. And you said Mark Vientos needs to be in the lineup both days. So, Joe, we know how you feel. Is the Ruff experiment just kind of run out of sand in the hourglass at this point?
It feels like it has, and it's just been a very difficult stretch because it's hard to be confident in Vientos because he hasn't gotten enough opportunity. The Mets have consistently, and part of that is, I'm sure, to back up the fact that they traded 4 players for this guy, is give this veteran an opportunity to get out of the funk. And the only way to get out of a funk is to play. And he just hasn't done it. And Vientos hasn't gotten enough of an opportunity where I'm now all of a sudden feeling very confident in Mark Vientos. But obviously he had the good game in Oakland. And I think at this point, I mean, we're talking about a matter of days before the postseason. You need to really decide, are you going to ride Darin Ruff in the playoffs at this spot? And yeah, that sigh. Yeah,
no, I'm not.
That sigh tells the whole story. The problem is, are you confident in Vientos either? And you could do another sigh if you want, because we don't know. But the only way to find out is to play him. And I mean, those 2 games, can they make a difference? Sure. I mean, what if he hits a 3-run home run off Max Fried? Does that change the narrative in what you want to do come the NLDS? Hopefully not wild card series, but we'll talk NLDS as a glass half full podcast about the division.
Yes.
But Vientos in theory could snatch that job away from Darin Ruff, and it's one of those things that it's unfortunate. He's a veteran who, as we talked about when they traded for him, this is a guy with a long running history of crushing left-handed pitching. This wasn't he hit lefties this year. He's always hit lefties. That's just been his calling card, and he not only is not hitting them, it's not like he's hitting the ball hard and having bad luck results. he doesn't look like he has a chance in most of these at bats. So for me, I want to give Vientos as much of a shot as possible. And, maybe that is the juice as we get into October. Does Vientos add a little bit something where you bat him down in the 8 hole or 7 or 8 hole, and he adds a little potential thump to the lineup?
For me, listen, it's this simple with Ruff, right? He's had 74 plate appearances with the Mets. He is a total of 10 for 66 when you obviously take out the walks. He's batting 152. His OPS is barely above 400. He has not hit a home run with the Mets in those 74 plate appearances. He's driven in 7 runs. He has 3 doubles, no triples. I think I'm at the point where, and you know what, for Joe, and I'm guilty of this. Let me raise my hand. When they traded for him, I'm like, hey, they got somebody that hits lefties. Is it a splash move? No. Is it the move we wanted? No. Do you sit here and go, this is an awful move? You can't do that because they needed somebody that hits lefties, and Ruff has traditionally done that. Sometimes when a guy is 36 years old and isn't hitting anyone, it probably might just be over, okay? Or it's not working here from a mental standpoint. Now he's lost in the funk. I just look at this, Joe, and my answer to the question is, I don't know if Mark Vientos is an impactful MLB player right now. I don't know if he'll be a mediocre one right now. But I do know Darin Ruff is ineffective. And I'd rather take the chance. It's kind of like this, and this is something that drives me nuts, but there are appropriate times for this. When a starting quarterback is just leading goose egg drives forever, for multiple games, and the fans all start cheering for the backup, they don't know if the backup can even throw, play, do anything. But they know they've seen enough of what doesn't work. That is how I feel about this, that maybe the kid gets hot for a stretch. He's got a power bat. We saw the opposite field home run. Maybe he poses more of a threat up there at this point. At least I've seen Vientos work some at-bats for walks, like legitimate at-bats. And I think the final point is, if they don't trust Vientos, which my thought is Buck has shown zero trust in Vientos, and I don't think that's changing because Buck is an old school manager. Say Marte is back. The DH on this team, I think, has to be Escobar at that point. I think you need to configure the lineup that Guillorme is out there playing, and assuming Marte's back and you have his bat out there, I think there's no way that you just default to an option that's better, even though the idea was not for him to be the DH when all things started.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, there's no rule that says Darin Ruff or Mark Vientos have to be the right-handed DH. Like, that's definitely not written in stone. The idea, I love that. I think that's a very creative way to look at it, where you get the defense out there with Guillorme at third, McNeil at second, Lindor at short. Like, that's, and then obviously Pete at first. That's as good of a defensive infield the Mets could put together. And then Escobar is a switch hitter, and most of this year has hit better against left-handed pitching. It might even make more sense to not carry either Darin Ruff or Mark Vientos on the playoff roster. Like, you could go without either of them. So it's going to be very interesting here over the next week how they decide to configure this postseason roster. And yeah, I think Darin Ruff he's got to be looking up at a spot on this team. Like, there's no way, like you said, when you really think about it, like, obviously I'm watching and you could see that it's not working. But when you just read the numbers at an OPS just over 400, like, that's almost impossible to do, honestly. I feel like we become very mean to Darin Ruff, so I hope him and his wife or family don't listen to the show. We're sorry for being mean.
It's not personal.
Yeah, it's not personal. We want to see the Mets. We want to see the Mets win, and the reality is Darin Ruff is not giving them an opportunity to do so in that specific role that they acquired him for. And it's one of those things that it's kind of the old adage of, from previous regimes of you traded for this guy or you gave this guy a contract so you feel obligated to play him. Look, you could just chalk it up and say Billy Epler made a bad trade. Life will go on. I mean, it's the way it is. That doesn't mean you have to make the rest of the 2022 season suffer just because, a bad trade was made.
Yeah, it's spilled milk at this point. The sunk cost, it doesn't matter. At this point, look for solutions. Stop trying to clean up a mess and look for solutions. And back to Escobar, counting his whole season, we know how bad his stretch was the first couple months. He has almost an 800 OPS against lefties. So if you want him to be your designated hitter against left-handed pitching, the numbers are there. And when you look at September, I mean, the guy's got almost 100 plate appearances, and his OPS is over 1,000 right now. He's hit 7 home runs in the month of September. Month's not even over yet. He's getting on base almost at a 400 clip. Like, Escobar's played in the postseason. Like, this isn't one of those things where it's like, oh, he's just hot right now. Like, Escobar's been in this moment before. He's a veteran player. He's not gonna. I don't think the moment is going to be too big for him. So, Joe, I think you're right. I think what nobody really wants to talk about is that there's a chance that Vientos or Ruff aren't even on the postseason roster. You might want the secret weapon, Terrance Gore, on this in some kind of role instead.
Terrance Gore is on the playoff roster regardless of Ruff or he's on the roster. They didn't carry Terrance Gore throughout the year in AAA Syracuse and call him up and add him to the 40-man roster the day before the deadline to be playoff eligible. They didn't do all that for them to just be like, we're not going to carry Gore. Gore, you're going to see it in at least one playoff game. Vogelback is going to get on base with a walk probably. And before he gets to first base, he could just take a right into the dugout, and Terrance Gore is going to be standing on first base, and he's just going to run. Like, that's precisely what they acquired him for, to run in the postseason, so he will do that.
My favorite Terrance Gore stat, 15 career hits, 43 career stolen bases. He's just, we know what he is, and it works. It doesn't matter. He doesn't need to bat. He doesn't need to do anything. Just get on base and run around like Kyler Murray on the base paths. That's what he reminds me of. He's just Kyler out there running around, driving people crazy.
I was so excited when he got into the game when the Mets blew out Oakland and he made the diving catch in center field, and then he came to bat, and I was just like, I need a Terrance Gore home run more than life itself, and he just reached on an arrow by the second baseman. But regardless, like, love me some Terrance Gore, and all the stats when you think about like plate appearances versus World Series rings, like, he literally just doesn't bat. He just comes and he runs. And we talked about him last week kind of in detail about everything he puts into it. So it's more than just being a fast guy. But he provides value for the playoffs, and the Mets need to figure out what they want to do, if they want to have a right-handed DH or if they want to utilize an Escobar or someone like that.
My favorite thing about Terrance Gore is everybody knows he's running when he comes in to pinch run. And they overreact so much that they throw it into center field like 8 out of 10 times. Like 8 out of 10 times, and then he just runs over to third. And it's like, okay, Terrance Gore is now on third for free. All right, Joe, let's get into the mailbag because I have quite a few questions for us on today's show. This first one from Johnny, who said, do you think there is an opportunity for whichever of Carrasco and Walker doesn't make the postseason rotation to jump ahead of Lugo for the 7th inning role?
I don't know about that, but it's going to be interesting to see how they decide, because Taijuan and Carrasco have very similar stats when you think about how they're performing against good teams. Both have struggled mightily against teams above 500 this year, and both have beat up on lesser teams. So it's going to be, I feel like when you think about just the health factor, the stuff factor, it feels like Taijuan Walker is going to fit better as the starter, and Carrasco is going to transition better as a bullpen guy because he has that whiff rate on his slider. Velocity similar on the fastball, but Carrasco gets more swings and misses than Walker on average. So I think Carrasco fits more there, and I think Lugo's been really good now for like about a month and a half. So I think we're having a reaction to Sunday's game against Oakland where he gave up 3 runs in the 9th inning, or 2 runs or whatever it was. He got hit up a little bit there in Oakland. So I think it's kind of a reaction that he now needs to go down in the pecking order. To me, I think Lugo's still probably their best option in the 7th inning. But one of those stars is going to be in the bullpen, and it's going to be interesting to see how they work that dynamic, because you also have McGill, who's like a similar type of guy where it's like stuff, starter, maybe a couple inning guy. Trevor Williams, seemingly like he's warranted a spot on the playoff roster, you would think, but maybe not. I don't know. It's going to be fascinating to me to see how they work out this playoff roster.
Me too, because you're always wondering, is Taijuan or Carrasco, whoever it may be, the guy that you always say, Joe, there's a shorter leash in the postseason? Are they the guy that somebody has a rough start and they got to come in the 3rd inning? And are they pigeonholed into that role where instead the 1 inning roles that are high leverage, hey, we need 3 outs in the 7th, I defer to the fact that Buck will go to the guys that have been doing it all year. I know some people don't want to hear that because Lugo hasn't traditionally been himself the whole time. I think he's really turned it around much better recently, like you said, but he hasn't been the dominant pitcher we're used to. Trevor May's had his struggles. Drew Smith's had his struggles. But at the end of the day, I think Buck will lean on those guys when it's all said and done. It's fascinating to watch because we don't know at this point because he's never had that kind of arsenal to come out of the bullpen, and he won't until the postseason games. This one from Kurt, his baby Eli, who is in a very, very awesome Mets baby jersey, said, Baby Eli wants to know, we are all impressed with Steve Cohen, but with some big names possibly leaving in the offseason, does this feel to you like a must-win year for the Mets? Is there some now or never feel for you here, Joe?
So Baby Eli, very advanced in his knowledge of the Mets.
Incredible vocabulary for Baby Eli.
Incredible. But he also has a lot of life left, so maybe it's not so now or never for Eli. He's got some time, but I don't think so. I really don't think it's now or never. I think we've previously been conditioned that whenever the Mets were a playoff contender or a playoff team, that we would not get it again for years. I believe under Steve Cohen's ownership and Billy Epler's run as GM, and who knows who they're going to bring on as team president, and if president of baseball operations comes into play, like there's some moving parts coming here over the next 12, 24 months in the Mets front office. I firmly believe this is going to be a team that's contending year in and year out. So while they're a bit older and you want to try to take advantage of that, I think they are trying to do so. I don't think it's a now or never situation, because I expect this time next year we're previewing the Mets 2023 playoff series, whatever it's going to be. So I believe in this team's vision for now and for going forward. So Eli, have some patience, young man.
Yeah, I listen. I'm the same way. Do you want to win this year because it's been one of the best Mets seasons, especially of our lifetime? Yeah. Of course you do. If they didn't do it, it wouldn't feel like, man, the window just closed. Because here's the reality, Mets fans. If the Mets, nobody's offering Jacob deGrom to stay more money than the Mets. If deGrom wants to go play elsewhere, that is his decision, and one he very well could make. But it's not like that money evaporates off the table. It gets moved somewhere else. How many times have we already seen with this regime the ability to pivot to other solutions? And that's what they will do. It's going to be a winter where, because of who they are, whether it's true or not, you're going to hear the Mets connected to Aaron Judge over and over again. You're going to hear the Mets connected to big names. This is who the Mets are under Steve Cohen, and he's not going to settle for any less than that. So, yeah, you want to win the World Series this year because you always want to win the World Series, especially after how magical of a season you've had. But I just think the reality is this is a team that's always going to be trying to go for it.
I agree. They're going to be going for it year in and year out. And, I tweeted this the other day. As of where we're recording right now, the Mets have 97 wins, right? 97? Yeah, they're 40 games over 500 now. So they're 97 right now. If the Mets win Mets go 500 for the remainder of their season, just 4-4, they will be the second winningest team in franchise history at 101 wins. And they could do better than 4-4. In theory, they could do worse, but I would think 4-4 or better feels like the most likely outcome for the rest of the way. So you would very much like to win a World Series. You and I talked about this. I'm 34. You're a little younger than me, and we've never seen them win a World Series. So my desire is to win a World Series every year. But like you said, I think when you just think from a big picture perspective, it doesn't feel like it's now or never. It feels like it'd be really awesome if they did it now. But if not, they're going to put themselves in position to be a contender for it again next year.
Yeah, I mean, they have guys here that are on bridge deals for this 2 to 3 year window that Max Scherzer, Starling Marte, like they want these guys to have a full they want to have a full shot as long as these guys are here, and they're not going anywhere next year. So, speaking of the playoffs, Steve Miller, friend of the pod, says, what team other than the Braves and Dodgers would be the toughest matchup for the Mets in the playoffs? The Cardinals are a more complete team, but the Phillies and Padres have a couple stud starting pitchers and a few big boppers who can impact a short series real quick. Joe, for me, I don't want to see the Padres because I feel like the Mets never hit Yu Darvish. Like, they don't even show up to the game when Yu Darvish pitches. I don't care how bad he's been. I always have a fear of Juan Soto. I think the Padres are a good team that is wildly underachieved beyond belief. And maybe some of that's the letdown of the Tatis situation. I don't want to see the Padres. I know the Mets can handle the Phillies. And I agree with Steve's point. The Phillies have some good pitchers, and the Phillies have guys like Schwarber that could hit 3 home runs in 2 hours. And the Cardinals, we know the history there with those two teams, and Goldschmidt and Arenado have been 2 of the best players in all baseball. I still don't want to see the Padres.
I was going to say the Padres too, but for the sake of not just saying I agree, I'm going to go with the Cardinals for the kind of the point that Steve made. They're well-rounded. They got pitching in the starting rotation. They have bullpen. They have 2 of the best offensive players in baseball, and they always have pesky players that like are going to annoy you in a playoff series. Like, I just feel like Tommy Edman or something.
Lars Nootbaar?
Yeah, like someone like that is just going to be like a nuisance in the playoffs. So the Cardinals have been really good. I mean, if you really think about it, it was just like 2 days ago or a couple days ago that the Mets and Braves clinched that the winner of the NL East would be the 2 seed. So like the Cardinals have been, not quite on pace, but close enough that it took this long to confirm that the NL East winner will be the 2 seed. And that's ultimately what I care most about, is becoming that 2 seed. And you face who you face, but the Padres will be very, very tough in a 3-game set with Yu Darvish likely pitching. You would think game 1, and Juan Soto and Manny Machado, guys that could turn it on really quickly. So Padres, Cardinals, those concern me most. I feel like the Mets just have the Phillies' number this year, knock on wood, but we might be having a different discussion if they face them in the NLDS or something. But those would be Padres, and Cardinals certainly would be my 2.
Yeah, the Cardinals are the kings of having guys like David Freese turn into freaking Ted Williams or David Eckstein. It's unbelievable. So I agree. It's hard for us as Mets fans to get that out of our heads, that somebody that, not that we know nothing about, but don't expect, just goes completely bonkers against the team. So, all right, one more here, and we'll run back to Steve Miller because he did have a 2-parter. He said, are there any rumblings of any of the Mets coaches who could be up for promotions with other clubs next year? He said, could Hefner profile as a manager or Chavez? Joe, my takeaway real quick on this one is, because I don't know, we haven't had Chavez on the show. We don't know enough about how he's viewed in the league at the moment after this being his first year as the hitting coach. I think Hefner is really good at what he does. And I think that, and that's not even biased from the fact that, we had him on as a guest. The Mets pitching has been really good. It's none of that. It just feels like Hefner's been a well-regarded mind since before he was ever a coach for the Mets. And the fact is, he's worked with a lot of different personalities for this Mets staff and bullpen. And for the most part, he's had a lot of success.
So I'm not 100% sure their managerial status, but it actually brought up something. I remember I read maybe like a month or 2 ago, an article by Mark, I want to say it was Mark Feinsand at MLB wrote it, which was like, or someone at MLB.com wrote it, and I'm just giving Mark credit. It was like list of potential managerial candidates, and there was no Mets names on it. So I don't know if they're just not thought of in that light yet. Like, Hefner's a really bright mind. There's a lot of bright pitching coach minds out there. This feels like the first year that Hefner, it feels like he's made a massive impact on a winning team. That's the key. They're winning too, right?
Yep.
So that obviously helps. And Chavez, in his first year as a hitting coach, it feels like that would be quick for him to go from, assistant hitting coach to 1 year as a hitting coach on a team that, like you said earlier in this show, it's a good, not great offense, to now be thrust into a managerial role. Do I look at them as potential future managers in the sport? Yeah, I think they have all the makings of what could be a manager at the major league level. But I feel like as of now, the Mets might be safe.
I think so too. I think Hefner being 36 might play into it too. Baseball, is one of those sports that they don't take that plunge very often. There are young managers in the game, but 36 is not the common age range of guys being hired. It's a sport that goes back to the well. Guys get second, third, fourth chances as managers plenty of times, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the nature of the game and how executives think in the sport. So yeah, Hefner might need another year, but we'll see. Nothing will ever surprise us, especially if the Mets do win a World Series or in a World Series, and you have some under-market clubs that don't spend a lot of money and they're looking to poach from a winner. And you don't have a ton of options at that point. There's only a couple of guys doing the jobs. And like you said, we don't think Chavez is there yet. But Joe, massive week for the Mets. I am half scared and half excited for the next time we record this show, because it's going to be, we're going to know things. We're going to know things the next time we record this show, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Closing thoughts for this week's episode of the Mets Pod. The second to last the Mets Pod of the 2022 regular season. That's insane.
That's crazy. It feels like we literally just started with our opening day podcast. So baseball season goes quick, and like you said, massive week. The Mets control their own destiny. Take care of business. Yeah, it's a good feeling that they're not, like, it would be great if they got help from teams facing Atlanta. I know there's certain people out there that complain about the lack of help that the Mets get, but they control it. So they don't need Atlanta to lose 2 out of 3 to Washington so that they could stand a chance. If the Mets take care of their business, they're going to win the National League East. So I'm a glass half full guy by nature. I'm going to believe when we're talking this time next week, the Mets will either have clinched or will be on the verge of clinching the NL East. And if I'm wrong, that'll stink. But if I'm wrong, they're still in the playoffs. So absolute worst case, we still have some more baseball after the next podcast. And hopefully it's a little gap where we get a break and we get to watch other teams play in the wild card round.
Here's a question. If the Mets win the division, does the Mets Pod get to do the champagne toast celebration on that episode? You'll have to stay right here to find out. And a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. Big week ahead. We'll catch you next time.